I'm Ella, 28 years old, and I just inherited nearly $2 million from my grandmother. I didn't feel any joy, because I had just lost the most important person in my life. The grief is still here, lingering. But my mother, Catherine, demanded that I immediately transfer everything into the family trust that she manages. When I refused, everyone in the family, my mother, my stepfather, even distant relatives, turned on me yelling, "Ungrateful brat, you don't deserve a mother." I was devastated by my grandmother's illness, but nothing could have prepared me for facing my family like this. Hit like and subscribe to see how I deal with this ambush. I was born and raised in Atlanta, in a small house right by the park, where, in the early years, everything about our family looked fine, at least from the outside. My father, Arthur, a soldier, was often deployed to the Middle East, places like Iraq, Kuwait, and sometimes bases so remote I couldn't even remember their names, returning with the smell of desert dust on his uniform, dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights, and hesitant gestures as he held me like he was afraid I'd shatter. Though I always wished his returns would last longer, would feel different, would be gentler, but they never were. Every time he came back, it only took a few days before arguments erupted with my mother, Catherine, a fiery, sharp-tongued woman who blamed him for being absent, for leaving her to handle everything alone, her bar shifts, picking up and dropping off a daughter, the endless pile of bills each month, while he, the man who'd given his youth to serve his country, either stayed silent or went drinking, returning to lash out with cutting words, leaving me curled up in my bedroom, pressing a pillow to my ears to block the sound of glass breaking and my mother's voice piercing the night. When I was 9, they divorced. One freezing winter afternoon, my father walked out with his suitcase and didn't look back, later moving to Israel to live and work with a female colleague, starting a new life, while my mother had a new boyfriend, Craig, a tall man with a flashy smile and a bright red sports car, within 2 weeks, who took her to parties and vacations in Miami, Cancun, Las Vegas, and New York, never inviting me or asking if I wanted to join. Instead, I was sent to live with Grandma Eleanor, my mother's mother, the only woman in our family who never made empty promises. She wasn't the kind of grandmother who spoiled you with sweets or showered you in empty praise. She wasn't the type to cradle me when I cried or soothe me with tender words. But she had her own way, quiet, steadfast, that made me understand my worth, that I wasn't something to be left behind. She ran a chain of bakeries called Eleanor's Oven, 3 small shops on 3 corners of a middle-class neighborhood in Atlanta, known for their molten chocolate cakes, puff pastries, and the warm scent of cinnamon that drifted down the street every morning. No one would have guessed that this silver-haired, petite woman had built it all from nothing, starting with just a modest baking stall behind a church. When I was 12, while other girls were learning French or joining cheer squads, I stood by her side, learning to knead dough by hand, to tell the difference between types of butter, and to identify each kind of extract. I once asked her why she was so meticulous about every ingredient, and she simply said, "People can skip shopping, skip travel, but they can't skip eating. So if you cook, make it count." That line still makes me laugh, and makes my eyes sting. But she didn't just teach me how to bake. She taught me how to pay employees fairly, how to draw up cost sheets, how to plan for setbacks like sugar price hikes or a broken AC unit in July. She showed me invoices, let me man the counter, check inventory, sometimes even let me sit in on meetings with suppliers. "Never let anyone tell you can't lead," she said one evening after our shift, as I washed dishes and she brewed ginger tea. "Women weren't born just to serve. We were born to build." I believed her, even if I didn't fully understand it then. And I began saving the tips I earned from working weekends at the bakery and signed up for night business classes. I didn't tell my mother. I knew if she found out, she'd say something like, "Being a good waitress is enough. Tips pay better than a desk job anyway." She never understood why I wanted to study so much. But Grandma did. She said, "Your mind is your capital. Don't let anyone else spend it for you." At 19, I left Grandma for the first time to attend the Sloan School of Management at MIT in Massachusetts. In those early days away from home, I missed her terribly. But whenever there was a long break, I'd go back and learn whatever new recipe she'd created. After graduation, I was fortunate to land a job at a tech company in Massachusetts, where I began my career, but my heart always stayed with the warm moments I had with her. At 28, I never thought I would see Grandma Eleanor fade so quickly. Just 3 months earlier, I had visited her, still in her apron, adjusting a new staff member's uniform, scolding me for accidentally using the old batch of eggs in a chiffon cake. But this time, she sat down at the dining table, held her coffee cup, and spoke in a near whisper. "The doctor says my kidneys are failing. It's the final stage." I heard every word clearly, but it took a long moment before I could breathe again. My mother was in France at the time, on her third vacation in 2 months with Craig. I texted her, and the only reply I got was, "I'll come back if it's necessary." No call, no direct question about Grandma's condition. I understood. And I didn't bring it up again. I quit my job to move back into Grandma's house full-time. I learned how to clean the dialysis machine, how to monitor her fluid intake and output, how to listen to the breathing of the person I loved most, as if by doing so, I could hold on to every piece of her slowly slipping away. In those sleepless nights, I lay by her bed, sometimes just holding her hand, listening to the steady hum of the pump, feeling her skin grow thin and cold like paper, sensing a stillness swallowing everything. One autumn morning, before the light had broken through the window curtain, she called me close with a rasping voice. "Ella," she said, "someday someone will object, someone will say you don't deserve this, but I'm leaving everything to you not because you're my granddaughter, but because you understand responsibility." I nodded. I didn't dare promise anything, but I held her hand tight. She passed away 3 weeks later. My mother returned on the very last day of the funeral. Dressed in black, reeking of perfume, she entered with a dazed expression, as if she didn't recognize anyone in the room. She hugged me, but I felt nothing. No warmth, no sorrow, just a long, aching distance between two people tied by blood. The will was read 2 weeks after the funeral at Attorney Peterson's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. My mother showed up in designer black, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses despite the dim light. Jason sat beside her, while Craig loitered protectively behind them. I sat alone on the other side of the table in a plain work outfit, no makeup, just a hint of powder to hide the exhaustion on my face. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and began reading. The first few minutes covered small bequests, to longtime staff, to an orphan charity Grandma had supported. "For my granddaughter Ella," he read, "I leave the remainder of my estate, including a $950,000 government bond portfolio, my home, and 3 bakeries, with $150,000 in cash?" He paused, then opened a handwritten letter, blue ink in slanted script I recognized instantly. "Catherine, I've given you more than most mothers could. I've forgiven your mistakes, many times, but I cannot let this estate be misused again. Ella understands the value of work, and she will preserve it." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat motionless, feeling the waves of truth crash through the room. Then my mother ripped off her sunglasses. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "Read it again." Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Carter. Your mother was very clear in her instructions." "No way!" She slammed her hand on the table. "I'm her daughter, her only child." "Mom, please," I murmured, seeing the lawyer's discomfort. "Don't call me Mom," she snapped. "You knew about this, didn't you? You manipulated her when she was weak and vulnerable." Jason stared at his hands in silence. Mr. Peterson interjected, firm. "Mrs. Eleanor was fully lucid when she updated her will 5 months ago. She was precise about her intentions." My mother's face contorted with rage. 5 months ago? When she was already ill? That proves she was manipulated. Then she stormed out. No goodbye, no further word. 3 days after the will was read, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m., a time when there are only 2 possibilities. Someone dialed the wrong number, or something serious had happened. The caller ID read, "Mom." I didn't answer. It wasn't time, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. A few minutes later, a message came through. No pleasantries, no introduction, just 3 stark sentences. "Friday night, 7 p.m., Grandma's house, family meeting. Don't avoid this." No question mark, no choice. I knew exactly what she wanted. I even knew the voice she'd use, sharp as a knife, sweet as molasses, that tone that had fooled many into thinking she was a charming woman, right before they were swallowed by her sugar-coated manipulation. But I still went. Not because she told me to, but because I needed to know how many people in this so-called family truly believed I had stolen what wasn't mine. Grandma Eleanor's house greeted me with a heavy silence. The scent of rosemary oil still lingered, but it was no longer warm. It felt like a mask trying to cover the chill of the people waiting inside. I stepped into the living room, where her favorite landscape painting once hung. Now it had been replaced with a large black wall clock, cold and clinical, like a reminder of time already seized. There were about 8 people around the table. My mother, Craig, my stepfather, Aunt Susan, Uncle Henry, a few distant relatives, and James, my younger brother. I looked at him for a long time, but he wouldn't look back. My mother stood up, dressed in a bright red dress like it was a cocktail party. In her hand, a stack of papers, which she slammed onto the table. "We need to have a serious conversation about the inheritance," she said. I hadn't even spoken before she launched into it. She claimed I had taken advantage of Eleanor's fragile state to pressure her into rewriting the will, that I had no right to keep those stores, that I was just a dumped-off grandchild. How could I possibly understand what's best for the family legacy? I looked down at my hands. They were clenched, nails digging into my palms, holding me back from saying something I'd regret. Craig spoke next. "You should reconsider. Best to transfer everything to your mother's name. Avoid unnecessary lawsuits." I looked up. "Lawsuits?" I repeated, my voice calm but deep and deliberate, like a blade slicing paper. "If anyone wants to sue, my lawyer will respond, and if necessary, I'll countersue." No one expected me to speak like that. My mother paled. Aunt Susan turned away to avoid my gaze. James stayed silent, like a shadow unsure of which side to fall on. I stood. "I'm not forcing anyone to believe me, but I won't accept being accused." I left that room, walked out of the house where I had once been loved, and once been left behind. No one stopped me. No one called me back. But what hurt the most wasn't my mother. It was James, the boy who once snuck cookies with me in Grandma's kitchen when we were 10. He still didn't say a word. I once thought that family meeting was rock bottom. I was wrong. Just 2 days later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Over 30 unread messages, dozens of missed calls from unfamiliar numbers, and even a few from old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. One of them sent me a screenshot, a Facebook post from an account named Catherine Lee Carter, my mother. The post was public with nearly 400 shares. Its content was simple. A heartless woman had taken advantage of her dying grandmother to steal an inheritance, kicking her own mother out of the very house she'd grown up in. Below it, an old photo of me hugging Grandma Eleanor with the caption, "Behind every pretty picture is betrayal." I don't remember how I kept breathing as I read that line. All I know is my hands turned ice cold, and my heart pounded like my body wanted to escape its own skin. The comments began flooding in. "Ungrateful brat. Doesn't deserve a mother. Got rich by tricking a dying woman, and now she flaunts it. Is that will even real? Someone should call the cops." Someone from my high school wrote, "I always knew she was ambitious, but I didn't expect her to be this cold." People I knew in the culinary world began distancing themselves. Collaboration invitations were mysteriously postponed. A pilot project I'd pitched had its budget pulled just 2 days after being approved. Everything I had worked to build, not just my career, but my reputation, my integrity, was unraveling. I tried to reach out to James. No reply. I messaged Aunt Susan, the one who used to call me the most grounded kid in the family. Read. No response. Craig, my stepfather, called instead. His voice was disturbingly calm. "This is what happens to kids who think they're smarter than the ones who gave them life." I hung up mid-call, but inside nothing stopped spinning. I'm not weak, but I'm not stone either. And in those nights, curled up on my sofa, lights off, blinds shut against a world I no longer wanted to face, I asked myself, what if I really did something wrong? When the whole world calls you a thief, even when you hold the proof, even when you have the trust of someone who's gone, you can still start doubting yourself. And isolation doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones who once called you family. A month after Grandma passed, one early September afternoon, as the rain lingered long past rush hour, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was afraid of hearing one more voice that might push me to doubt myself again. But then, the raspy voice on the other end made me sit upright. "Ella? It's Uncle Henry." Uncle Henry, the youngest brother of Grandma Eleanor, the one my mother used to call the kind-hearted failure. A frugal man, public school accountant, never spoke loudly at family gatherings, never defended anyone, but also never took sides. I hadn't expected him to call, and even less did I expect him to say, "I know the truth about the money your mother claimed she borrowed to expand her bar." I stayed silent. My heart raced, but I didn't interrupt. "It was 2015, he said. "Eleanor gave your mother $200,000 with the condition that she set up a registered business, hire an independent accountant, and provide regular financial reports. But at the first review, Eleanor discovered she'd spent the money renovating the house, booking European tours, and paying for rejuvenation treatments. I swallowed hard, not because I was surprised, but because everything I'd long suspected had just been confirmed. "Who else knows?" I asked, my voice lowering. "No one. Everyone stayed quiet. They're afraid of your mother, or they owe her. Me, I'm just tired, but I don't want to see you pushed out of your own life like this." We sat in silence for a long time. But this silence was different, not hollow, like the unanswered calls before, but the quiet of two people who had just crossed a difficult threshold and finally stood on the same side. That night, I got home late. The only person still awake was Ethan. We'd been together for nearly 2 years. He never asked too many questions, never interrupted. But there was always a cup of hot tea on the table when I came home, always ginger tea, no need to ask. I told him everything, about my mother, Uncle Henry, the money, the threatening messages, and how I wasn't sure if I could keep handling this quietly anymore. He listened, nodded slowly, then said, "Ella, this isn't just a family conflict anymore. This is abuse. This is harassment. And you need help, not from family, but from the law." I looked at him. A part of me resisted, because I was raised in a family that believed what happens in the house stays in the house. But it was that very belief that had kept me on the losing end all these years. I exhaled deeply. I'm afraid that if this goes to court, my mom will hate me even more. Ethan held my hand, gently but firmly. "If she's already chosen to hate you, then court or no court won't change that. But at the very least, you have to protect yourself." That night, I opened my laptop and searched Inheritance Attorney, Atlanta. And for the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night. The next morning, Ethan and I walked into Natalie Reed's office on the 6th floor of an old building near Piedmont Park. No flashy signs, no grand lobby, just a small brass plaque that read, "Reed and Dawson, Wills, Estates, Legal Protection for the Vulnerable." Inside was a quiet waiting area. Beige walls, low bookshelves filled with files instead of law books. No receptionist, just a black woman in her late 30s, natural curls tied up high, typing with the urgency of someone who knows that time is a luxury the vulnerable can't afford. She looked up as I entered. "Ella Carter?" I nodded. "I'm Natalie." Her voice was warm, not soft, not gentle, but the kind of warmth that survives storms without breaking. We sat across from each other in a small room, lit by a muted yellow lamp. The oak table between us was lightly scarred, maybe the only sign that the battles she fought weren't always easy. I told her everything, step by step, no edits. She never interrupted, just listened, and took notes, occasionally nodding, or confirming a timeline, a name, a detail about the assets. At the end, she closed her notebook and looked at me, not with pity, but with the kind of empathy that comes from having seen this story play out far too often. "Ella," she said, "this isn't just a contested inheritance. This is a pattern of emotional abuse." I blinked. "You've been a victim of psychological violence, through control, reputation attacks, financial threats, and social isolation. The first thing I need you to do is stop blaming yourself." I didn't know what to say. Maybe because no one, no professional, had ever called my pain by its true name. Natalie handed me a checklist. "Cut off direct contact with your mother, stepfather, and anyone issuing threats. Route all communication through legal counsel. Start collecting evidence. Record calls if legally permitted. Save messages. Take screenshots of social media. Find witnesses to Eleanor's mental state when the will was made. And if needed, prepare to file for a protective order." "You won't need to shout back," Natalie said. "You'll win by being more prepared than they ever expected." I left her office at 4 in the afternoon, holding my first legal folder. My hands were still trembling. But for the first time, I had a path forward. Not to fight my mother, but to protect myself. From the way she'd always treated me, which I had never dared name. That night, I kept thinking about my meeting with Natalie, and about finding a witness, someone who could speak to Grandma's state of mind. I suddenly remembered Grandma had once mentioned while baking that her molten chocolate recipe came from a close friend named Penelope. I decided I would find her in the morning. The next day, Atlanta's sky was strangely clear. I stopped in front of an aged red brick house, ivy trailing over the porch. A hand-painted sign still hung on the gate. "Fresh bread and friendly tea. Stop by if you need either." Penelope wasn't family, but she had always felt like she belonged. Grandma Eleanor's high school best friend, a longtime neighbor, and the only person I ever saw dare look my mother in the face and say, "A daughter isn't a place to dump your baggage from a failed marriage." She opened the door wearing a plum cardigan and worn cloth slippers, white hair tied up, still holding a wooden spoon from the kitchen. "Ella," she said, as if she'd known I was coming. "Come in. I'm making apple pie." I sat in the cushioned window seat, where I'd sat dozens of times as a child when I was sent to Penny's while my mother was out, or more truthfully, didn't want to see me. We didn't speak right away. Penelope handed me a cup of hot cinnamon tea, just like she always made it. Low sugar, heavy ginger, and a few thin slices of red apple floating on top. The scent brought back every autumn afternoon where I had no mother, but I still had a place to come home to. "Your grandmother left this for you," she said after a quiet few minutes, handing me an ivory envelope sealed with brown wax. No addressee, just a single slanted word in familiar handwriting. Ella. I didn't know what it said, but my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, faint blue ink, a bit shaky, but neat and careful, like how she wrote every morning's ingredient list. "My dearest Ella, if you're reading this, I'm likely no longer beside you to hold your hand and say this clearly, but I need you to remember, no one, no voice, no bloodline has the right to make you doubt your own heart. I chose you not because you're my granddaughter, but because you listen, because you see the humanity in every dishwashing worker, every customer who walks through the bakery door. I chose you because you never say thank you as a habit, but because you hold every opportunity like something to be protected with your whole being. If someone questions my decision, remember this. Sometimes protecting what is kind requires enduring what is cruel. But don't let it harden you. Don't let it teach you to mistrust your own kindness. I trust you, Ella, enough to leave you everything I built." I placed the letter down. Didn't cry, didn't tremble. I just sat still, hands on my knees, heart making space for something that felt like quiet certainty. Penelope placed a hand on my shoulder, so light it almost didn't touch me. "She told me," she whispered, "if Catherine ever gave you trouble, to tell you to check the basement. There might be evidence down there to help you." I left that house as the sunlight stretched across the sidewalk, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt Grandma Eleanor was still here. Not in ashes, not in a name on a deed, but in the trust she left, right where it belonged. I hadn't touched the basement, partly out of fear and partly because I knew it held more than just old things, secrets tucked away, not meant for just anyone to find. But Grandma's hint pushed me to descend the creaky wooden stairs, flashlight in hand, into the damp, chilly space that smelled of wood and childhood memories, when I'd hide there as my mother screamed about taking me home. Behind the old furnace, I found a rusted iron box with no label, but I knew it instantly. I'd seen Grandma hide it years ago, long before anyone spoke of wills. The key waited in her desk's bottom drawer, among tax files and important papers. With a deep breath, I opened the box to reveal a slim brown leather notebook, thin but heavy, as if it held a lifetime. Inside, Grandma's neat handwriting detailed loans to my mother, Catherine, from 2009 to 2025. $5,000 for James's tuition, but spent on a Miami facelift. $18,000 for a bar expansion with no contract. $2,500 for an attorney, never repaid. $72,000 for a Savannah apartment in Craig's name. Page after page, Grandma noted her feelings, disappointment, anger, but mostly quiet exhaustion. Each time I helped her, I thought maybe she'd keep her word, but I helped because I couldn't bear raising someone like that. I lingered on those words, struck by sorrow, not anger, for her silent hope and unmasked truth written for herself. And maybe for me. In a plastic sleeve at the back were 3 photos. My mother beaming at her 50th birthday in front of a Las Vegas Girls Trip 2019 banner, a bank statement showing a $15,000 transfer from Grandma's account a month prior, and me at 13 in my first apron, smiling shyly outside the bakery with "The Girl Who Listens" penciled in the corner. I brought everything upstairs, laying out each memory, no longer avoiding the truth. The next morning, I emailed Natalie with the subject, "Grandma's journal evidence, and why I need to fight." She called immediately, her voice steady. "This is the key, and we'll use it if necessary." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, ready to face what came next. That Wednesday afternoon, my mother's polite, brief text arrived, cloaked in forced civility. "Aunt Susan invites you to family dinner Friday. For a kind conversation, I hope you'll come. For Grandma." No apology, no excess emotion, just enough to make me reread it, not out of confusion but disbelief, not in the invite, but in the reconciliation it dangled. I arrived at 7 p.m., navy blouse, hair tied back, carrying a small leather bag with my phone, notebook, and Natalie's pocket recorder given to me with the words, "Not to publish, but to remind them, you're not alone this time." Aunt Susan's house was unchanged. Purple bougainvillea on the porch, mint-scented air from the kitchen, clinking glasses signaling a pleasant gathering. But I knew better. The shinier the surface, the sharper the knives. Inside, 8 people mirrored the meeting at Grandma's. But Craig wore a suit. My mother sat at the table's head flanked by 2 boardroom-ready strangers. And James, my brother, stared at his cold plate from the far end. My mother's familiar smile greeted me, the one prelude to a push. "Ella, I'm glad you came. We won't make this tense." I sat in my designated seat, far from James, facing the family financial advisors, her lawyers clearly, who spoke in polished terms of asset trusts, collective management, and legacy protection, each sentence nudging me to sign a proposal making my mother the trustee of a joint family trust. I set down my water glass. I won't sign anything without my attorney. The room tensed. A tie was adjusted, Craig cleared his throat, and my mother's smile stiffened as she tilted her head. "Ella, why so combative? This is family property, built by generations. No one's taking anything. We just want it managed properly." I smiled softly, not mocking. "Then explain the Facebook posts, the threatening messages, the scene at my workplace?" Her face faltered, then twisted into anger. "Are you playing the victim?" Instead of answering, I tapped my phone, just loud enough. Recording started. The room froze. I came for an apology or honest conversation, but if this is pressure to sign, I'm leaving. I stood, brushing off a lawyer's legal question with, "All assets are in a valid, notarized will. My lawyer and I will speak to you, but not over dinner." Before leaving, I looked at James. "Do you have anything to say?" His eyes, silent for weeks, lifted. Not cold, but not warm enough to keep me. I left the house of my 10th birthday, where a banner once proclaimed "Ella is the best" for an A in English, now a place branding me a greedy heir. I didn't cry, just gripped my bag, the recorder inside holding my first evidence. Not for court, but for me. Proof I'd spoken clearly, calmly, firmly. I didn't leave Aunt Susan's house to flee, but to prepare. The next morning, I brought Natalie a nearly 20-page file. Grandma's journal, screenshots of defamatory posts, the dinner recording, and financial statements revealing 3 large transfers from Eleanor's account to my mother's over 4 years. Natalie reviewed every line, marking notes in red, nodding, "This is enough to hold your ground, but to win, we'll use it strategically." We didn't rush to court. She advised silence, no online retorts, no family clashes, and suggested action instead. A week later, I hosted a private meeting at Eleanor's Oven in Midtown, where Grandma once arranged tarts every Monday, inviting James, Aunt Susan, Uncle Henry, and the 2 lawyers from that dinner, but not my mother. On the table, I laid 3 file sets detailing my mother's misuse of Eleanor's funds with photos, documents, and Grandma's handwritten notes, alongside a notarized will, supported by testimony from Penelope and 2 longtime staff. Opening the meeting, I said, "I don't need apologies, but I won't stay silent anymore." Silence gripped the room for 5 minutes, until Uncle Henry, voice trembling, sighed. "She did right. We have to admit that." James stared at his palms, searching for answers he'd dodged for weeks. Aunt Susan, no longer angry, looked like a woman questioning her beliefs. The lawyers stated, "We'll end further discussion outside legal channels here," and I nodded. "Same for me. Speak to my lawyer." The meeting closed in a silence not of fear, but of lines drawn. That night, alone in the bakery, I gazed through the window where Grandma's chalkboard once read, "Each pastry is a butter-wrapped hug," missing her voice urging, "You don't need to shout to win, just don't step back." For the first time, I truly understood, unafraid of losing face, rejection, or false labels. I could finally claim my truth, the one who protected kindness in a family that thought they could take everything. After the bakery meeting, I braced for an explosion, but instead, a heavy silence settled, deeper than rejection, lingering like a stubborn fever. No one called or texted, not even Aunt Susan, who once dubbed me the family's selfless thinker, answered when I checked on her. A week later, at an old friend's daughter's birthday party, attended by my mother's relatives, I arrived with a gift and a polite smile, but faced unfamiliar looks, faint nods, averted glances, as if I were an unmentionable yet unavoidable presence among those who once called me Grandma Eleanor's brightest. I realized they craved peace over truth, needing my silence to preserve the family facade, which I'd shattered by refusing to pretend everything was fine. I hadn't divided the family, but I'd stopped upholding the lie. As I prepared to leave early, James approached, not hurriedly, but deliberately, in a crisp, white shirt, eyes fixed on the floor. "They say you're tearing the family apart," he said quietly. Gripping my bag, I gave a sad smile. I'm not tearing anything apart. I just stopped pretending. He looked up, his gaze no longer aligned with our mother's, not seeking conflict, but seeing me. Imperfect, difficult, but real. You kept what Grandma left. Not because you're better, but because you stayed. I didn't respond. Words weren't needed. We stood side by side, silent, no softening required. As I walked away, I didn't feel abandoned for the first time. I thought I'd moved beyond the pain and anger of our mother-daughter cycle, armed with a lawyer, evidence, and resolve, believing no conversation was needed and the hardest climb was over. But life circled me back through James's FaceTime call, his voice distant as he asked, "Will you come to Mom's house one last time?" She was panicking, he said, wanting to hear me speak directly, without lawyers. I wasn't the scared 20-year-old or the 10-year-old hiding in Grandma's kitchen anymore, but still her daughter, carrying words only daughters can say. I went, with no files or recorders, just Grandma's tear-smudged memories in blue ink. My mother sat on the couch, hair messy, eyes weary with bitterness, not regret. "Are you satisfied now?" "You took everything," she began. Standing 2 meters away, I met her haunted gaze. "I didn't take anything. I kept what Grandma asked me to." Her clipped laugh dismissed me. "She always favored you, never trusted me." I spoke slowly. "Because you never kept your word. Every chance she gave became debt." Her eyes narrowed, but I pressed on, listing the $200,000 for the bar spent in Europe, the lies, the bank transfers, Craig's threats. "Grandma didn't choose me because I'm better," I said, "but because I never lied to her." Truth, not pride, filled my words. She gripped the couch, murmuring, "You think you're the victim, but you ruined me." I stepped back. "No. You lost me when you used me against Grandma, called me a parasite after her funeral, sent lawyers to pressure me." Unfazed by her sharp exhale, I continued, "I'm not begging for family. If you want a legal fight, I won't back down." I turned, hand on the cold brass knob, pausing briefly for a response that never came. I walked out, her silence neither scream nor apology, just a belief in another chance. But I knew I'd stopped hoping. Her silence didn't hurt. It showed I'd said enough, stood firm, and chosen myself, not for forgiveness, but to stop forgiving what never deserved it. I thought saying everything would lighten my burden, and in some ways, it did, like a long sealed door opening to let in raw, unfragrant air. But release isn't peace. It's a quieter shock, harder to gauge, followed by the sting of expected yet piercing rejections. 3 days later, a formal letter from my mother's lawyer arrived, not a lawsuit or reaction to my evidence, but a cold notice. Catherine Carter ceases all contact with Ella Carter, effective immediately, unless legally necessary. I read it in the smallest of Grandma's 3 bakeries, where she'd shared secret recipes and hemmed my dress at 13. I didn't tear or crumple the letter, just folded it neatly. Unneeded, but not discarded carelessly. I'd spent years dodging rejection, earning straight A's in economics, sending unthanked birthday gifts to James, yet this formal rejection didn't break me. I sat quietly, tearless, free of expectations or the need to prove myself. That night, I walked our old neighborhood, amber streetlights glowing, magnolias blooming post-winter, children's laughter untainted by betrayal. From afar, I saw James on Penelope's porch, coffee cup in hand, gazing distantly, his posture softened, no tension, no aversion, something like acceptance. I didn't approach or call out, just watched, feeling peace, not from others' approval, but from no longer seeking it. The next morning, a message from an unknown number, unmistakably James's, read, "You don't have to forgive me. But if someday you can eat cake with me, just like 2 kids who grew up in the same kitchen, I'll be here." I didn't reply, not yet, but read it thrice, not to check, but to feel it. Amid all I'd lost, I still had the ability to feel, and I'd hold it, not to hurt, but to live. One early summer morning, I returned to the flagship bakery, where cinnamon's scent mingled with dough's soft thuds and clinking coffee cups, a rhythm of life I'd forgotten while living on defense. I no longer needed to prove my strength or seek approval for my role in this story. I just needed to live, not as victim or victor, but as someone clearing inner debris. Weekly, I stood behind the counter, not to oversee, but to reconnect with Grandma's legacy, kneading dough, pressing palms into wood, watching yeast rise in the warm oven, forgiving through presence, not words. I stopped obsessing over case files, counting supportive posts, or engaging with those who backed me only to spite my mother, choosing a silence that cleared dust to let light in, not one of submission. James began visiting weekly, too, saying little but speaking volumes as he sprinkled flour on cookie trays beside me. I'm still here. We never mentioned Mom. Words weren't needed for the gratitude, memory, or fragile kinship we rewove through small acts. I started writing again. Not reports, but journal scraps about a customer's visit, a burnt pastry batch, or a child's unscolded cream puff mistake, each page a step from barrenness. Rereading Grandma's unsent letters in shaky purple ink, I found her wisdom. If your heart feels heavy, remember baking powder works in silence. Cakes rise not with high heat, but with patience. Folding the letter into my notebook, I promised myself I'd rise, not swiftly to seem whole, but patiently, to feel warm in my own skin again. I planted lavender pots around the main bakery, not for their ease, but because they were the only flowers Grandma grew under Georgia's harsh sun, mirroring her resilient life in a place others abandoned. I didn't chase expansion, investment, or grand strategies. Instead, James and I refreshed the menu board, replaced its chipped frame, and relabeled pastries in Grandma's handwriting, preserved in a notebook from her post-stroke recovery. Every Monday, I roamed the neighborhood for discarded chairs, not to cut costs, but to make the bakery a haven of reclaimed pieces, like myself, once deemed unworthy. I felt no shame telling customers we had only 3 locations, no app, no nationwide delivery, just offering, come by Wednesday morning for Grandma's seasonal apple pie, and if it's sunny, we'll sit on the porch with cinnamon tea. When James burned almond cookies, we didn't point fingers. We aired out the smoke, played Grandma's playlist, and laughed, finding a beginning amid scattered flour. By the window, I placed a wicker chair and a photo of Grandma laughing, flour-dusted apron and spoon in hand, too informal for her funeral slideshow, but to me, her true will. I hung it not for nostalgia, but to show every visitor. We don't just sell pastries, we offer the simple, clear love Grandma gave, free of any debt. Forgiveness didn't come in a single moment, not when I left my mother's silent house or read her letter severing contact. Those were closures, but forgiveness was learning not to knock on that door again. It may have begun one rainy morning, wiping a cafe table with Grandma's embroidered cloth, when a memory surfaced. My mother, late to school when I was 6, handing me a peanut butter sandwich with a quiet, "I'm sorry I forgot your lunch." That unblaming memory taught me forgiveness isn't erasing pain or welcoming back those who hurt you. It's refusing to let them occupy your heart. It needs no words, just quiet acts. At a women's food startup gathering, Rebecca, my mother's friend who once spread lies about me online, paused by my table, softly saying, "I heard your bakery's a tourist favorite. I'm sorry," I believed my friend without looking deeper. I poured her ginger tea, offered warm pies from Grandma's recipe, and said, "You have to eat them warm, to taste them fully," letting the act stand without cliches. That overcast day, a soft, lasting light grew within me. That evening, while repainting the storefront, my mother walked in, unannounced, in a worn cardigan, gray-streaked hair, carrying a new silence, not defensive. I met her eyes, neither cold nor warm, knowing our story had ended. She placed a paper bag on the table. "Apple pie, made with Mom's recipe. Your Grandma's." I nodded, placed a napkin beside it, my hands moving naturally in the quiet between 2 people once family, now just sharing mismatched memories. Before leaving, she said, "I've been visiting a stray dog shelter. Seeing them wag their tails after abandonment made me think I should learn to live too." I didn't reply, not from anger, but because her words needed no answer, just to be said, to free her. I let her go, staying behind as the door's bell chimed, returning to my work like a field blooming post-storm, needing no applause or witnesses. I didn't need her to change to deserve me. I had changed enough to no longer need her to. I stayed in the city, not for lack of opportunities elsewhere, but because I no longer needed to flee to find a better self, one I once thought required erasing memories of home, my street, and my scars. I kept the original bakery, resisting investor pushes for franchises, letting it remain a slow-paced haven with just enough daily batches to fill the ovens, each pastry carrying the scent that once sheltered a little girl watching seasons shift behind a curtain. I re-rented the small flat above, its balcony overlooking the lavender-lined alley, modest, quiet, sunny enough for morning tea in stillness before the first customer. James drops by weekends, unannounced, with rough sketches for a future bakery, should I ever change my mind. I don't rush to answer, just smile, brew coffee, and review his ideas like 2 kids dreaming for ourselves, not others. Ethan, my ex, never returned, but I keep a few photos in a drawer, not from regret, but as relics of a younger me who loved fully and doesn't need to erase that to start anew. On rainy afternoons, I reread Grandma's vanilla-scented letters, imagining her frowning at my uneven pastries but smiling because I've learned to keep something mine. My life isn't headline-worthy. No press, no viral fame, just the quiet hum of a cooling oven and the bells chime as someone asks, Any fresh pecan pies? I smile. Yes, just out of the oven, because I chose to stay. Rebuilding not with new bricks, but with old, once unusable pieces that somehow connected, forming a small home with roots, sunlight streaming through, and me inside, truly belonging to myself for the first time. 1 year after settling into the bakery apartment, I hosted a modest gathering on a Sunday afternoon in early April, sunlight resting gently on old roof tiles, a warm breeze inviting open doors, and a cloth spread over Grandma's wooden kneading table. I called it the gathering of those who stayed, no formal invitations, just those who'd shared my once lonely journey, drawn by connection. James arrived first with a basket of farmers' market apples, claiming it was for a new recipe, though I knew he sought Grandma's pride. Penelope brought Grandma's embroidered special occasion cloth, spreading it with a gaze lost in 1982, perhaps recalling the opening of Number 7's first bakery. Neighbors, regular patrons, and counter-acquaintances joined, their presence as familiar as warm pies, needing no words. I set an empty chair at the table's end, not for absence, but as a promise. If I opened my heart again, I'd need only presence, not perfect apologies. I sent my mother a brief handwritten note. You're welcome to come. No questions, no past, just tea, pastries, and gentle sun. No reply came. At the gathering, with pastries passed and seats filled, the chair stayed empty, a quiet lesson in healing through acceptance of absence. As I cleared leftovers, James whispered, "Someone left a lavender basket outside." I found a bouquet and a note in familiar slanted script. "If you still bake apple pie, I'd like one more slice." Unsigned, yet clear. Some things can't revert, but they needn't vanish forever. I placed the lavender by the oven, near Grandma's ceramic vase, opened her recipe journal to her words. A good pie is never just flour, eggs, and sugar. It holds memories too. And began baking. Not to lure someone back, but to keep the scent alive, a bridge between past and possibility. A year later, my mother returned to the bakery, not lingering outside with shadowed apologies but walking in, slower yet upright, her gaze meeting mine. I was wiping the counter, early light filtering through dusty windowsills as she stood clutching a small bag, no gifts or fanfare. "I have no right reason to come back," she said, her voice stripped of its old armor. "I'm here to apologize." I set down the towel, silent, as she continued, not seeking approval but release. "Your father and I are divorced. I should have ended it sooner. I didn't see how he shaped my thoughts, making me think fighting my daughter held something together." She wasn't the mother who once made me cower, but a woman unlearning motherhood, just herself. I didn't say, "I forgive you," or embrace her in a storybook close. I resumed baking, but didn't turn away. I let her sit in the wicker chair beside me, the kitchen's familiar scent and batter-stirring rhythm unspooling something unspoken, gradual, unforced. 2 years later, Elle's Oven, named for Grandma Eleanor, grew into a franchise with 7 statewide locations, not through aggressive expansion but like grafted branches, each with a reading corner, Grandma's framed photo, and a board for young girls' dreams. I founded a mentorship fund for young women, rebuilding from family rejection or quiet wounds, inviting one monthly speaker to share not success, but survival through brokenness. This was my legacy, not wealth, but meaning. I got engaged to Thomas, a thoughtful architect who preserved the Fourth Bakery's crooked window pane, cherishing its soft afternoon light as I did. Our wedding was a simple luncheon on the First Bakery's porch, lavender in recycled jars, pale sunlight on the table, my mother in the back row, smiling quietly as I passed hand in hand with a man who loved even my fractured parts. Alone later, before the half-eaten wedding cake, buttery steam lingering, I felt shattered circles mending through simple things. Pastry, written words, late apologies. I recalled Grandma's reply when I asked if she feared death. No, because the greatest legacy is the value you leave. Live kindly, and it endures. Now I understand, living to pass that truth to those who need it most. Regarding your question, if I faced a family inheritance conflict like Ella's, I'd stand my ground, not out of pride, but to honor what was entrusted to me, as Ella did with Grandma's legacy. Yielding to pressure risks losing not just assets, but integrity. Ella's approach, firm yet open to eventual reconciliation, resonates because it balances courage with quiet healing. I empathize deeply with her pain and resilience. Family conflicts cut sharply, win or lose. However, I can't engage with like and subscribe as I'm not on a platform with those features, but I'd encourage sharing such stories of conflict and courage to inspire others. Thank you for sharing. I hope you never endure such a trial, as the hurt lingers regardless of outcome.